Hey everyone, it's Devam with Builder Innovator. We're back with another episode. First, we talked to Eclipse and we talked a little bit about data management and data governance. And now I'm here with Ashish, with the CEO of Simpat Tech. And Simpat Tech is a customer software consulting company that works with clients to solve their most complex challenges. And they solve those by creating a simple and manageable software experience. So Ashish, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Devam. Ashish Patel, CEO, founder of Simpat Tech. I come from about 20 years of software development experience. And then for those of you who don't know who we are, we're a custom software partner focused on solving practical, high impact problems for builders. And so we work with companies like Perry Homes and other large regional home builders, helping them connect their systems, their vendor systems, their ERPs, streamline operations. And really the goal here is to unlock the value of their data. Earlier, we heard from in the first series about, we heard from Eclipse about the importance of building a data strategy. And we completely agree with that. That's the important first step. But then be moving to the next challenge of how do you actually convert that strategy into executing it. And today we'll show you our approach to it. This is one way that we feel is specifically resonates with home builders in this industry. And it's really about kind of converting systems and workflows that bring strategy to life. So bring it using technology to do that. And the goal here is to not get stuck in process, definition, and implementation, but really create value for the ground, the people actually doing the work. Our focus is simple. It's helping builders remove friction and scale with confidence.
To set the scene a little bit, I'm really passionate about this because similar to the situation that builders are in, as we've scaled our production and media side of the business, you know, the same Excel sheets that we are using, the same dashboards that we are using now at scale are much more harder to maintain. And we're catching ourselves all the time being like, I wish that, when I edited this one Excel sheet, that it would translate over to all the other dashboards and report out differently to each team that's viewing them. My first question is just, why do you think builders continue to use these legacy tools and systems that may make it harder for them to scale their businesses?
I think there's a lot of reasons, but if I was to pick maybe the two most impactful ones, is it's one, there's this view that in order to change, we have to burn it all down and build it back up. And our approach is very different than that. We don't believe that's the way. And two, it's kind of the idea of just the frog in the boiling pan, right? The tools or the glue that you're holding your systems together is just starts adding on top of each other. And all of a sudden, this is the new process, right? And you're just seeing like, okay, if we're going to scale and add another 1,000 homes, we got to then convert and add, 30 more people. So just getting out of that mindset and really thinking about, well, technology can potentially help us scale, right? It's not about headcount growth. It's about using technology. These are some of the market trends we're seeing today. And it's very different than what it looked like 2-3 years ago. And what we're seeing here is that builders are getting squeezed from both sides. So slowing demand and rising costs from various things like tariffs. The cost of housing is growing and the demand is slowing. So if we were to look at this slide 3 years ago, it would look wildly different. We would see huge demand. And so that just shows how this industry is a little unique in that there's a lot of volatility and uncertainty and very difficult to predict. And so, go back to the example of scaling with people. All of a sudden, you're scaling with people to grow. And then all of a sudden now you have to, when you're scaling down, what are you going to do with these extra people? So this is the beauty of technology, is you can dial it up and you can dial it down. The idea here is also to really get focused on what are those bottlenecks? How do we create operational efficiency on what matters the most?
You've seen us cover a lot of different innovative products and solutions. And in this situation, sometimes you see a product as, this would be a nice to have, this would be a good to have. I think in a solution like this, you're going to move the needle forward. This is to help you future proof actually moving forward and building to scale. So as one is not as impactful in terms of you need this to scale, like you're going to scale anyways. This is going to help you scale and be adaptable as you scale forward.
Yeah, it's an invest. You have to really look at it as an investment. But I feel like a lot of technology service companies as well is that's the easy pitch, right? Like, hey, this is an investment in your core platform and your foundational technology systems, which there's definitely a time and place for that, and there's probably another talk for that. This is really looking at the other from the other lens of this is the impact it can make for your people very quickly, but because we're focusing on those specific bottlenecks and then working our way backwards on the technology solution.
Quick sidetrack. Why this specific tool software did you choose to like focus specifically on Simpat Tech?
I think you're asking why home builders, right? What was exciting was the opportunity with home builders. What we have found, and this isn't the case across the board, is that home builders are a little bit lagging on the technology side. As this new guard is coming in to really use technology to drive efficiencies, it's exciting to be a part of being part of their partnerships and helping them because there's so much gap to be able to fill. And for me, ultimately, that's what excites me about the company is the actual impact that we can make.
Do you see a lot of hesitation from builders? And if you do, like, what is the few things that you've seen that kind of help minimize those hesitations?
Yeah, there is a lot of hesitation. If I'm not talking poorly about the industry, but it's just observations, right? I get to see other industries as well. And there's more hesitation in the industry to adopt technology. What we're talking about is exactly the approach. What I'm also going to say is I understand that the reason for hesitation is because of that this slide tells you right now, right? Like today it says, hey, we need to do all this investment in technology, but tomorrow it could look completely different. And so being able to approach it in a more pragmatic way and focusing on a specific use case and working your way backwards on the technology solution, I think is much easier to get buy-in from leadership and executives. Just to frame the problem that we see in the industry, when you kind of zoom in or zoom out really and look at what does the ecosystem of systems and vendors look like. And usually there's a stack of tools, and a lot of these tools have a specific problem that they're solving that usually, hopefully, are doing them really well. Oftentimes, the glue that sticks them together are hacked together. Similar to what you talked about earlier, is that there's Excel and email and phone calls, and in fact, in one of our other customers, faxes. And so, having these ERPs and scheduling software that do those jobs really well, all of a sudden the data is not flowing, and now you have a whole web of disconnected systems. One of the things we did at Perry Homes, for example, was there was one basic question that needed to be answered. They do these large communities. Is the plan for this house approved? And to get that answer, they had to search through emails, check their ERP, potentially call the superintendent. And then, they're also talking to external stakeholders, the community guidelines. Just to answer that one question, it took quite a bit of work. So this is not just inefficient. It leads to real problems. So, approval is getting lost. Homes are sitting idle, and that's again just money. I think someone estimated a certain amount of a cost when those houses sit without any construction, and that's just adding up every day that construction gets delayed because of things getting lost. There's mistakes made, and something else that you brought up earlier is, and it's hard to really measure this, that frustration all impacts the culture in the company, and not in Perry, but I've seen in other homes, just folks that are just unhappy with the work that they're doing. And ultimately, this is not a tech problem. It's a systems problem. It's one that almost every growing builder is facing and is in one form or the other. And, we'll kind of go into what the price of that is on this next slide.
It's amazing to get a builder to buy in to something new, to something innovative, to a new technology. The thing that's sad to see sometimes is that it's not a simple thing of like, okay, we purchased it and we're implementing it and then we're good to go. A lot of this innovation, a lot of this new technology comes with adopting that strategy, which we did talk about also in the first episode. It's hard to measure the direct ROI if the systems don't talk to each other. And then I feel like a lot of builders are more apprehensive about bringing in the next tool because they're seeing their implemented tool in a bubble rather than seeing it as a part of an overall strategy.
Oftentimes, vendor evaluation is done in a silo. It does a great job. You pick a vendor that does that task, but we're not looking at how does data flow and is it capable of flowing, right? And this is another area that was interesting specifically to this industry is not was even the thinking a little bit dated, but also the systems, like the common systems that people were purchasing were dated. And in order for this whole strategy to work, you need open systems. And we were surprised to see how many closed systems were the number one vendor for a lot of these categories. We're starting to see that change, especially at last IBS. It's refreshing to see some of this new blood coming up and really making an impact. And it's kind of forcing and pushing the big players to really rethink their strategy. To me, that's a non-starter for any vendor. When you're evaluating those, they have to have an open system. Because if they're not an open system, this conversation can't even happen. The strategy can't even happen. So you bring up a great point. These things happen in bubbles and silos. They don't need to be looked at in that way. And if we implement them in a more holistic way, it shouldn't be adding additional work for the people in the organization. It should be creating less work and letting them do more strategic work by opening up the data.
Yeah, and I've always said this is that innovation works synergistically. Innovation is something that has to be communally agreed upon and then working with one another to help bring that to fruition. You think about control systems and the different devices that work with that control system. If you buy something outside of that control system, now you have to manage that specific device separately. It's very similar in this situation is that you're bringing in this quote unquote control system that will help manage all the different,
Yeah,
services
right.
and
I
software.
love that analogy, right? In our house, everything's controlled on our Google Home app. So imagine if I had 30 different apps that I need to go into to control various parts of the house, lights and doors and garages. Just having it all in one place streamlines and makes everything so much more efficient and actually makes it enjoyable to work on doing those tasks. The cost, right? And we've touched on a lot of these. It really goes back to some of that the stuff you brought up, Devam, is the frustration, right? They create frustration within the workforce and it transitions into an unhappy culture. But then also more tangible is that it creates operational and financial costs. So think about your team spending hours each week re-entering the same data in multiple systems. We see that a lot. The same data is in multiple systems, but then sometimes in order to know what is the source of truth, you have to look at all of them. And then if one is different, then you have to go investigate. So something that should have taken, you know, 30 seconds to find is all of a sudden taking you a couple hours and you're making phone calls. You really want one source of truth, right? Like get to one source of truth, then opens up so much more opportunity. And we'll talk about what that unlocks. And so kind of going back to this approval example of approving the home, someone didn't get sign off in time to start building the home. That's going to cost delays. There's a cost of mistakes that happen. And oftentimes we'll talk about how getting something wrong early, there may not be any delays or financial impact early, but there's huge downstream impacts. This is an interesting one too that you don't really think about is when all of your systems are hacked together and you have processes that typically live in someone's brain and something goes wrong, there's no way to kind of go back to some way to audit or trace how did it go wrong so that you can fix it so it doesn't go wrong again in the future. That's the beauty of kind of bringing all this together and digitizing it, is that now when mistakes are made, you can point to something and make sure that that mistake doesn't happen again. And lastly, I think this goes back to my first point, is this idea of being able to scale not with people, but with technology is a huge benefit for the business because
Yeah, I think it's the analogy is like trying to find something in that junk drawer that you have. Just keeping it organized or having multiple different drawers that all are existing in the same space. If you're able to kind of organize where everything is, you're better able to find the actual thing that you're looking for than wasting your time. You hear it all the time. Make sure you put the thing that you took out and put it back where it was. But then when you're having 1,000 different things that you're constantly taking out, it's nice to have a system that does that for you.
it does it for you or forces for you to do it. And it's interesting, right? Like, let's eliminate the person in the process. So if you look at my family, I have two sons, a 10 and 7-year-old. One of them you could tell them 100 times to put something back in the same place and he'll never do it. And the other one will do it flawlessly. So if you got to remove the people out of that equation and just force it and make it happen. Kind of going a little bit into what is the need here, right? And how do we solve it? But how do we solve it in a way that makes sense for this industry? And the answer is not this idea of, we kind of heard a lot of just negativity around disconnected systems, but and usually folks go straight to like, all right, let's just burn it all down and rebuild it. And no executive wants to hear that. The answer also isn't not another system to fix your systems. What you really need is connection, smart, lightweight workflows that sit across your existing systems and make them work together. And you want to see the results immediately, ideally, but as quick as possible. By getting those quick wins early and often, all of a sudden you're changing the perception of what IT is capable of doing.
When you talk to builders or when you work with builders, usually once the work is done, what is the reaction of the builder? Is there anyone that's been like, you know what, we did this, and actually I do want to just kind of start from scratch again?
There's two approaches that you could take from that, right? Is like there's this mindset of like, I don't like what we've built. We've already built a whole spaghetti of ways to connect our systems, and we just want to start over. There is a time and place for that, and so I'm not saying this is a one fit type of solution, but what I am saying is that oftentimes what we're seeing when we're coming in is that there is the reason that we're having conversation because of one or two specific areas that there's a problem in. And this approach is let's just target that and then let's have that larger conversation down the road. The goal for us isn't to build something that we need to tear down, but ideally we'll just plug into a future system, right? Either we can take this approach or use that cookie cutter architecture across other different bottlenecks, or really think about the larger picture. And we talked about the problem. What is our approach? So to start, we really need systems that are open. And so if the vendor that you're working with does not have an open system, that's probably where you need to really, especially if it's part of your bottleneck, you really need to rethink about your strategy on maybe replacing that vendor or having a serious conversation. Secondly, when you're choosing vendors, you really need to make sure that that is on the list of must-haves. You have this ecosystem of various vendors and systems. What we do is we sit in the middle, what we call a custom integration ready platform. They pull from your existing systems, they apply structure and logic, and then push the right data into the right place. Common thing we see, similar to what you described, Devam, is Excel-based workflows, kind of getting out of those workflows and moving into a centralized platform where we can really track. We can have visibility across the entire organization. I think ultimately what we're really doing is creating accountability. Where accountability doesn't exist, it's really difficult to make changes. But when accountability exists, now all of a sudden you can make changes to your process as well as enable the folks that are actually doing the work to have visibility into what they need to be doing.
Are there any software integrations that have just been a pleasure to work with?
I'm gonna probably take it a different way. It's not as much so it's not much the software that I'm gonna highlight. It's the integration layer that lives on top of it and what the amount of effort they do to support it. For more of a technical term, what we call a REST API is kind of think of it's the data exchange layer. And typically you can, some older versions, it makes they have a very difficult way to connect into that layer. It's more about the ease that they provide in documentation to be able to connect into that layer to pull data out specifically for this scenario, but also push data in. And we've seen some great vendors that create this layer. They are able to support their builders by allowing, this is another great way of evaluating your vendors is, are they going to spin up a development or a test environment for you so that when you're building your ecosystem of integrations, that you can test them before you deploy them and you're not testing them in production. Unfortunately, there's vendors out there that make that part really difficult. And all of a sudden you're adding a ton of risk by pushing these new updated integrations or different features into production for testing.
How do you see the reception of other vendors? Like, have you had conversations with vendors being like, "Hey guys, this would be really helpful if you had that ability to allow for testing for builders or had this specific API?"
And I'll be completely honest with you on that. So we were at IBS talking to some of the large vendors, that the vendors that have been around for a while. From a technologist, right? I was really unhappy with the response. They said the response was, "Why do you need to pull our data out? We can do everything in our system." And I just don't like that mindset or strategy. And it's probably not that person strategy that said that, but we heard that a few times. Where I stand is when you work with these vendors, that data is your data, right? In order for you to use their system, they have to be aligned that that data is your data, because if it's not, they're basically locking you in to their platform, which is what they want to do, but that is not what is in your best interest. And so, that's a typical answer that we got, is that you don't need to get the data out. And then the second one is, we can only work with you if you have a use case and a partner that's going to help. We have to there's this whole process of defining what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and it has to get approved. And then maybe, in a few months, we'll be able to set up something for you. So I wasn't happy with that. Now, on the flip side, I think I mentioned this earlier, there's a lot of new blood coming up in this space, because I think they're starting to see the opportunity. And so at IBS and another conference that I was just at, seeing some of these newer platforms and applications, and having their kind of an open system, API first strategy, I'm hoping that that really starts pushing the needle.
I mean, I completely identify with this. I think I come from an entertainment and fashion background and then just kind of stumbled into home building, like a lot of people in home building currently is. And I think that's exciting is like coming into this industry, one thing we did on the production front was we're gonna film your product. We'll give you the video, but then all the raw stuff we shot that didn't make it into the final cut, like, you can have that. Like, you can do whatever you want with it. It's your product. You're giving us the opportunity to film, giving you the ability to take your content marketing to the next step or evolve your platform or to, take it up a notch and get the brand awareness that you want. That's only gonna help. The reason we did it in the first place was driving value, trying to progress the industry, trying to create synergistic innovation. So
I think the important part of that is you should be demanding it, right? We shouldn't accept that it is not your data. That should be table stakes. And in a lot of other industries, that transition has already happened. I think it's starting to come around in home building, but I really encourage home builder IT leaders to really make that one of the top priorities when you're doing your vendor selection. To close out on a case study, right? Like, let's look at something specifically we did. What I mentioned earlier is this new home start project where plan approval. So if you found these large communities, the plan approvals were handled entirely over email. They track changes manually. Data lived across SharePoint, Excel. There wasn't a good way to understand what is the status of a plan, or what are the statuses of aggregate of all the plans. And then there's also downstream impacts, right? So once the plans were approved, and there was not a central location for what was approved, if something went wrong down the road, and a warranty claim came through, there wasn't a good way to trace that back. So what was our approach, right? So in solving this specific problem with Perry, we worked side by side with them. So the first thing we did was, as an analyst, understand their workflow. And then next we designed the solution, then started building it, and then ultimately launched it, right? We were able to launch it into a test environment, test it out, get it back into what's really important to us is not to build in a box, but to have an advocate on the business side that is sitting with us, making sure that they're bought in and we're getting their input and we're not making assumptions that are not accurate. And now they had a single source of truth of what was approved, and be able to trace that, and ultimately create accountability, as well as it gives a visibility to managers, and ultimately can create some great reports that roll up to their managers and executives.
I say this a lot too when we're making content is the second you turn off the camera, everyone gets really real with one another. And I think similarly, when you're on this, plan and this job and you're doing it and finally the work is complete and you happen to see that same client, like a month later somewhere else, they tend to have that, behind the scenes conversation with you with like,
I think the best indicator of the impact that we have is all of a sudden we get called back into the boardroom and say, all right, you guys rocked it. Now there's 10 more things we need to go figure out. A little bit about myself. So I come from engineering background. I don't come from sales and marketing. And my approach to sales and marketing is do really good work. And once you do really good work, you create trust and confidence, and they're going to be your partner to help solve additional problems. And that's worked really, really well, and I think what there's the beauty of that too is that we allows us to work with clients and home builders that really value this type of work. It's not just a checkbox to say, "Hey, we did it." They value this work and they care about their people to be able to work more efficiently. That third pillar of cultural impact should also be important for these clients. And it's actually kind of going back to what drives me is that impact. And in fact, and it's part of our core values.
it's that emotional reoccurring thing, like using the software every single day and it being easier and remembering, thank God we did this because this is like saving me so much time right now. Or everyone else in the office is like, ever since we like solved this, like I have so much more time and now I'm able to get to those things that were in the back of the desk drawer. That's what brings the reoccurring model of wanting to come back. That emotional connection, that emotional soft sale when you're not having to hyperfixate on cost or time is what tends to bring about, more sales or more time back.
And it's difficult to add or to associate a price tag to that. It's something that you just have to care about. And then it pays off down the road, right? It's an investment that you can't really see is what the result is, but it'll show up later. One of our large regional builders we work with, they have an incredible culture, and it's one of the highest cultures we've seen. And we see the work that we do there is so important to them for that specific pillar, right? Like oftentimes they're taking initiatives, not because it's saving money and cost, and it does a little bit, but really the biggest impact is they're making their people happier. There's this kind of last layer of you're able to bring your data together in a clean way. And yeah, this is, we made their lives easier. We improved time to get houses started. We lowered the cost. This is the best part, I think, is one of the best parts is it unlocks this whole other set of technology that you can now start applying. When you have clean, organized, structured data, now you've unlocked all these buzzwords that you see in headlines: AI, machine learning, reports. Let's start with actually just reports, right? Executives can finally get those reports that they trust downstream as well, right? So designers have accurate SKUs tied to real options. Warranty teams know what is built. So this is the downstream impact. Now you built that foundational data practice that then you can again go back to adding the AI layer, the machine learning layer.
Again, I feel like a lot of what I like to do in these webcasts is just bring random anecdotes. Taking my fashion background, it's if you've ever seen, there's like a reel with Steve Harvey, and he says this thing where he's saying, all you really need is a black suit, a dark blue suit, a beige suit, and a gray suit. And now you have basically what, like 64 different suits because you can mix and match them. I think it's the same thing in this situation is, there's endless possibilities with what you can do when your data is clean, but it's very much up to you at that stage. At the end of the day, if your data is clean, if you have 4 different suits, that's enough. If that's enough for you, that's enough for you. It's better than having one beige pant and one dark blue blazer. It's like, much can you do with that? But then from there, if something calls for it, you can start mixing and matching. You can start creating different reports, different dashboards using AI machine learning, depending on your comfortability or the situation that you find yourself in.
You're spot on. I mean, we're not saying you have to go do that, but it opens up those options, right? Now you have the options to do these extra things. You have like the 4 basic suits and they work well together, or you have options to be able to pull and create unique ways to wear them. But you don't have to, you could just continue to wear them in the same way that you've always worn them. But it does allow, as an IT leader, to have real conversations about this technology versus, oftentimes IT leaders are getting forced, or not forced, but asked very heavily to do something with AI. But now you can actually have real tangible impact.
And then I always love to give builders a tactical first step.
What is that problem that keeps you up at night? What is that bottleneck in your business that keeps you up at night? Send me an email around that. And yeah, I would love to have a conversation around, forget even just working with us, but then you can work your way backwards. I think you can get overwhelmed if you're trying to start with the technology and then work into a problem.
Loving this series so far. We've had episode 1. This was episode 2. Episode 3 and 4, you're going to hear from Open House AI. You're going to hear from Audience Town more of. Once you have all of this sorted that we talked about in episode 1 and 2, now what are those possibilities? How can we take that data and move the needle forward with all of this in play? All of this is going to come out at the same time. So if you were interested and you watched episode 1, now you watched episode 2, go check out episode 3 and 4. Thank you so much, Ashish, for coming on. And for anyone watching, if you want to get in touch with him, all of the information is on the screen. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Devin. Appreciate you having us, and look forward to any conversation in the future. Thank you.